Right now, somewhere on your wrist or on your phone, there's a number telling you the temperature outside, and it doesn't matter what that number says, because you're not going to feel it. You'll walk from your bed to your kitchen without a single degree of the outside world touching your skin. If it gets bad enough, you'll pull on a jacket that costs more than a week of groceries and forget about winter entirely by the time you reach your car. For you, winter is scenery. It's something you watch happen through a window while the heat kicks on behind you. For nearly the entire history of our species, winter was not scenery. It was an opponent, and it was patient, and it did not care how clever you were, because it had 4 different ways to end you, and it only needed one of them to work. Start with the simplest one. The cold itself. Strip away everything we've built, and a human being is, frankly, not built for this. We're an African primate. Warm blood, thin skin, almost no natural insulation to speak of. Drop a naked human into a Siberian winter, and you have hours, not days, before the body starts shutting down non-essential functions to protect the organs that matter. And yet human beings didn't avoid the cold. They went looking for it. They pushed north into Ice Age Europe, across the Russian plain, into landscapes where the temperature could fall low enough to freeze exposed flesh in minutes. So the question isn't whether they were tough. Toughness alone doesn't beat physics. The question is what they built. The answer starts at a site called Sungir, in what's now Russia, roughly 30,000 years old. The burials there don't just contain bodies. They contain thousands of tiny ivory beads, arranged in careful lines across the skeletons, and when archaeologists mapped exactly where those beads fell, the pattern wasn't random. It traced the outline of fitted garments. Trousers. Shirts with sleeves. Shoes. Not draped hides thrown over a shoulder, but tailored clothing, sewn to the shape of an actual human body, closing every gap a wind could use to get in. And tailoring like that requires a tool most people never think about: an eye needle, thin enough to pass through hide, strong enough not to snap under the pressure, with a hole precise enough to carry sinew thread through. Making one of those from a splinter of bone is slow, exacting work. Whoever first figured it out solved a problem that had been quietly killing our species for millions of years, and once that knowledge existed, it could be carried into places the human body was never supposed to survive. Clothing solved the skin. It didn't solve the night. Because a fitted coat keeps you alive walking through the cold, but eventually you stop walking, and when you stop, you need somewhere to be still, in the dark, for hours, without freezing. Caves were the obvious answer, and caves were also rare, and taken, and often too far from where you actually needed to be. So people built. At a place called Dolní Věstonice, in what's now the Czech Republic, roughly 27,000 years ago, people were constructing oval huts using mammoth-bone and timber framing, packed with earth and hide for insulation, arranged around central hearths sunk into the ground. And in the same settlement, archaeologists found something stranger. Fired clay fragments. Hundreds of them. Not pottery for storing food, but small figurines and pellets, deliberately shaped wet and then thrown into fire hot enough to make them explode on purpose. It looks almost like practice. Like people learning, through trial and catastrophic error, exactly how heat transforms raw material into something permanent. That knowledge didn't stay decorative. It's a direct ancestor of the kilns and furnaces that everything else we've built depends on, and it was being worked out by firelight, in a shelter built to survive a single brutal season. Shelter and clothing kept the body alive through the dark. But a body that's warm and sheltered can still starve, and in winter, starvation was the threat that didn't announce itself with a temperature. It crept in over weeks. Here's what disappears in winter that we've completely forgotten how to notice. The plants stop. The berries are gone. The ground freezes hard enough that digging a root out of it becomes its own exhausting job. Migratory animals leave. The ones that stay go lean, and hungry, and harder to catch than they were all summer. A hunter-gatherer group didn't face winter with a strategy for finding food. They faced it with whatever they'd already put aside, because there was nothing new coming in, and if the math didn't work out in October, there was no fixing it in January. So they became obsessive about storage, and the cleverest version of it wasn't just drying meat, Though they did that too, slicing it thin and hanging it over low smoke until the moisture was gone, and rot had nothing left to work with. The cleverer version used the season itself as the tool. Dig into frozen ground and you've built a freezer that costs nothing to run. Cache a kill in permafrost, and it stays edible for months, preserved by the exact cold that was supposed to be the enemy. And at sites across Ice Age Europe, archaeologists have found evidence that people went further than just storing meat. They rendered animal fat down and mixed it with pulverized dried meat, and where they had it, dried berries, pressing the mixture into dense, portable blocks. It's essentially an Ice Age energy ration, calorie-dense, stable for months, engineered by people who understood, without any of our science, that in deep winter fat mattered more than almost anything else you could eat. Every one of those blocks was a bet on a spring the makers hadn't seen yet. Food solved the body's math. It didn't solve the mind's, and this is the threat almost nobody names, because it doesn't leave bones or ruins behind. It's the dark. The further north you go, the more winter takes the day away from you. 6 hours of usable light, maybe less, and then a night that stretches on long enough to make the previous one feel recent. You can't travel far in it. You can't hunt in it. You're confined, with the same handful of people, in a small space, for months, and confinement like that grinds at a mind in ways that cold and hunger simply don't. And this is where something remarkable shows up in the archaeological record: lamps. Small hollowed stones, found by the hundreds in deep cave systems like Lascaux, filled with animal fat and fitted with a simple wick, usually juniper or lichen, that burns slow and steady for hours. These weren't just light sources for finding your way through a tunnel. Residue analysis shows they were used for something else entirely, hours at a time, in total darkness, deep past where daylight could ever reach. They were used to paint. Some of the most extraordinary art our species ever produced, the horses and bison and aurochs on cave walls that still stop people cold today, was made by the unsteady, flickering light of burning animal fat, by people who had chosen to spend the darkest, most dangerous season of the year creating something that had no survival value at all. Not calories. Not warmth. Just meaning, made because the night was long enough to demand it. That's the part that should stop you. Every other adaptation on this list is a direct response to a direct threat. Cold gets a coat. Hunger gets a cache. But nobody needed to paint a horse on a cave wall to make it to spring. They did it anyway, in the one season that gave them no choice but to sit still in the dark long enough to think, and to grieve, and to imagine, and eventually, to create. So look at the whole shape of it. The cold that should have killed a hairless primate got answered with a needle fine enough to carry thread through hide. The absence of caves got answered with architecture built from the bones of dead giants, and a kiln's worth of trial and error. The hunger got answered with fat, and frozen ground turned into a pantry that could outlast the season. And the dark, the one threat that never touched the body at all, got answered with light carried into places light was never meant to go, and used for something that had nothing to do with staying alive and everything to do with staying human. None of that had to happen. Every one of those winters could have ended the way winters end for animals that don't adapt, quietly, and permanently, and without anyone ever knowing there was a species there to lose. And now you're reading this from somewhere warm, with food you didn't have to store and light you didn't have to earn, carrying, without ever having noticed it, the answer to a test that took 100,000 years and no small number of failed attempts to pass.